Welcome to the final of the river tank build. I think the 1960s and the 70s were the best of times for a kid to grow up in. I remember as a youngster biking across town to where a chap was building a mini zoo in his backyard. Fortunately, there weren't too many neighbouring houses in those days. But he clearly thought big, as he had a crocodile, tiger, lion, panther, monkeys and all sorts of exotic animals to delight or scare any kid. And the locals will tell you that he would take his lion out for a walk on the beach in the evening. Now, you don't see that every day. On arrival, you would walk across the front yard and be too excited to look at the goldfish in his ponds. Then place a coin on the shelf and a glass slide would open and a hand emerged to take the coin. And with a bang, a door swung open on your left, and you then stepped in. The warmth of the room hit you, and then the door slammed shut behind you. You then realised there were no lights in the room, but there were lights coming from aquariums around all four sides. You were in a fish room, and all the tanks were neatly set inside the wall. And as your eyes adjusted to the darkness, you could see at the far end another door, which took you through past the crocodile and into the mini zoo. Today our fish rooms are just so much different. They're always a work in progress, with different sized tanks, mismatching stands, an assortment of lights, cables, hoses, air pumps buzzing, filters gurgling, food, test kits and nets all abandoned on the floor where they were last used. To this day there are two tanks that I still vividly recall. One was next to the door and housed seahorses, which I found utterly fascinating, and perhaps they sparked my interest in scuba diving, which I took up in later years. But halfway along the main wall, on the left-hand side, was a tank which just dazzled. It was full of glow-light tetras. The light that was being used set them off to full advantage, and from that moment on I was hooked on fish. I would bike to that zoo many more times with the duffel bag, as I could buy fish direct from them. Plus, buying fish got you free entry. You just couldn't beat that deal. That family also opened a shop in the city, selling both fish and aquarium supplies. So it was not unusual for me on a cold winter's night after school to catch the bus, go into town and buy some exotic item. I'd then stand at that drafty bus stop, and when the bus came I'd jump into the back seat and have my purchase tucked in my jacket. Those were the days. But the times, they were changing. Houses were getting built closer and closer to that zoo. And strangely enough, people didn't want to hear jungle sounds in the middle of the night. And in later years, there was a growing awareness to house such animals in better conditions. But that zoo did continue for many years and gave a lot of pleasure to a lot of kids.
from the curves it is cast. The slow one now will later be fast, as the future now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing.
To this day, I still like to keep glow light tetras in my community tank. And while researching fish suitable for my river tank, I came across a glow light danio. Now, I'd never heard of that fish before, hadn't seen one, and obviously had not kept them. Apparently they'll be well suited for my river tank, as they prefer a temperature range of 68 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what, 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. They can grow up to just over an inch, and that'll be 2.5 centimetres, and pH between 6 and 7.5 would be good for them. Now, being a schooling fish, I decided that 8 would be the best number, so placed an order. And finally, the water had cleared. The filters were making a difference in trying to clear it, but it was about day 7 when I walked down in the morning and it was crystal clear. My theory is that the pumice being used in the substrate had finally got waterlogged and sunk. And this is where the problem came from. When I was building up that substrate, I ran out of coarse pumice to put into these bags, so I had a little bit of fine pumice and I used that, but it was just really ground up stuff which turned to dust and of course into the water stream. In the tank I had the 6 mountain minnows and 2 albino Cory catfish, and of course new fish soon to arrive. The plants were holding their own, but there were still signs of melting, and I just wasn't overly confident that they would all pull through. So I tried to supplement the normal tank lighting with some work lights, and I was giving them a lot more light than they would normally get, in the hope that that extra spurt of growth would establish them. The biofilm on the branches, that was really coming out, and I was very pleased about that. The Cory cats really enjoyed browsing on that, and the minnows also go and peck at it. The hairgrass was starting to spread, and I had noticed roots in the sand. The crypt had also developed a couple of leaves, and it wouldn't be long before that was taking off. Also pleased that diatoms were establishing on the rocks. I had been using those lights all night to try to establish that growth. Even though they are bacteria, they still will flourish with extra light. And of course I need all that growth and biofilm on the rocks before I can even think about getting hill stream loaches. The water was also aerating quite nicely, although I wasn't so keen on the big bubbles at the front. Large bubbles, of course, just go straight to the top, and I really wanted the water flow to try to carry the bubbles across the tank. So I'm thinking as a future enhancement, I might get a CO2 type diffuser and hook that up, and that should give a finer bubble, which should then carry with the water some distance. The new glow light danios were everything I wanted. They were a great schooling fish. Fought their way up the rapids, explored all the tank, and always active. Plus the bonus was that the minnows would join in. I had 3 young minnows which tended to just hang back, but all the adult sized ones joined in, so that would be a good combination to have in the future. The fish themselves are quite attractive. They are somewhat camouflaged against the diatom rocks, but as they grow older, their colours will really become more enhanced. The glow lights are quite happy to swim under the rocks where possible, so I'm glad that I didn't have too many broken ones in the substrate. Even so, I think that over a period of time there could be casualties. So when I order the hill stream loaches, I'll get just a few more of the glow light danios. There's also the possibility that one might go head first into one of the power heads, so I'm going to have to try to safeguard that as much as possible. This is an example of a power head which I've tried to make fish safe. Although it did come with very narrow slots which would keep out most fish, I was keeping it in a tank which had gouramis. Now gouramis, as you may well know, have very long, slender pectoral fins. I've probably got a proper name for them, but I just can't recall that. And one day, a few years back, I had a gourami in a tank with this power head, and I heard a commotion. Now you normally hear the sound of a bit of plant matter getting sucked into one of these pumps. So it sort of started off like that, and then a lot of louder noise. And what had apparently happened was the gourami had gone up close to it, and that long antenna type fin had gone through the slots and of course struck the impeller and caused the commotion. Now the gourami was lucky, it had a slightly bent fin. You could get a situation where that fin could get lodged within the impeller and possibly even rip out from the fish themselves. So it's just something extra to be aware of. In my previous video I mentioned that I was using a number of pumps and power heads, but for some people they might not understand the difference. For starters, an aeroplane or ship and other vehicles might have a propeller which produces thrust and moves that vehicle along. Put that same type of propeller into a casing so that it's embedded in it, and it's then called a impeller. Now that casing might just be long enough to cover the motor and impeller, as in the case of a power head. And the whole purpose of that is just to move water through it and therefore produce a current. Usually they have grills on them to protect fish, but if you are using one on a timer, something such as an autosynclus might go into it to search for food, but of course when it starts up it then becomes food. On the other hand, a water pump, although it has the same basic principles, it has a longer casing which may also extend into plastic tubing and the like, and its purpose is to move water from one place to another. But let's go and have a look outside. And this is one of two little ponds that I made in our backyard. We'll have a look from the other side. Now, larger power heads will usually have the capacity or throughput shown as either gallons per hour or litres per hour. Now, a pump will have the same, but will also have something called the head, or the working head. And of course your head's the tallest part of your body when you're standing up. So for a pump, the head represents the vertical distance that water can be pumped, in other words from the bottom to the top, as in this case we're higher up here, we've got a small pond. As an additional project we were going to have a little stream running from this pond down to the other. One thing about Kiwis, we're always keen to take on new projects.
But bloody hopeless at finishing that.
Yeah, what? So the vertical distance between this small pond and the larger one is probably about 1 metre or so. So when ordering a pump you need to work that out first and then add extra, because some pumps don't always live up to their advertising. This is where that little stream was to emerge from. As you can see, it's somewhat overgrown. We never did get around to buying a pump for this setup, mainly because of the problem of getting a power supply from the house out to this location. Now, when I did build that stream, I put a layer of polythene down and then moulded the stream bed with concrete with rocks embedded into it to try to give it a natural look. And in theory, once water's been running for a while, if you added a bucket of water at the top and then allowed it to flow down, most of that bucket of water would reach the bottom. It's being moved along by gravity. But let's go and take a look at what we've got set up in the river tank. Now, when I built my riverbed, I didn't put any vinyl sheeting underneath the rocks. That was intentional because I really wanted some water to go down and keep water circulating down in that deep substrate. And if you saw my previous video as to what that substrate looks like and how it's been built up high, you'll probably realise what I mean. But the water is somewhat contained. This catchment area is blocked on three sides by glass. On this side, it's got the opening where most of the water is supposed to go. This area is blocked by this large rock and tree stump. Over here, I've got a power head which is trying to prevent water from backflowing by pushing water through, and that just gives the default current when I've got everything else turned off. Now I've got the hang-on back here, and that's controlled by an app, or I can use Google. Hey Google, turn off rapids.
Got it. Turning off the rapids.
And that works nice and easily. I've got over here the outlet for the canister filter and the inlets over here, and I've also got...
No, but I found these results on search.
Hey Google, stop. And this grey one here is a pump which is now surplus. It came out of one of my larger tanks, which I'm now using a canister filter. It grinds away. You can hear that impeller, probably because it doesn't like being on its side. It would normally be used in a vertical position. But anyway, what I've decided is I'll probably replace this with my larger capacity pump. This one is 1,000 litres per hour, as is that little power head, 1,000 litres per hour. So I'm going to replace that pump with one which can do 2,000. So that's going to increase the water going into this catchment area and thereby increase the flow for when I want the river to be in flood. Now in here I've got a power head, and when we bought some garlic the other day, it came in a nylon sock, which I thought would be ideal. So I've slipped it over here to try to just make that fish safe, because these small fish, they come at almighty speed into these rapid systems, and they're going so fast they could easily go against the flow of that current for a short period, and of course might not realise the danger that they're going into. But there is a problem with this type of netting. It severely restricts the flow because you're partly blocking the intake and the outlet. And in this case I ended up cutting away the exit to allow water to flow through. Sure, fish might still go in there. It's got some partial protection, but it's just a risk you have to take. Now, if you happen to have Google running the lights in your house and it's night time, then here's something especially for you. Hey Google, turn off all lights. A few days later, we have fish. These arrived overnight on time. It did not fare as well as the first consignment. For the community tank, 3 ghost glass catfish and 3 ottocinclus. The glass catfish were looking a little bit sad, but did revive. And for the river tank, we had 3 Borneo suckers and 2 pandacories. One of those pandacories was not very well, and after 3 days it disappeared. For my nano tank, we got a group of 5 rosy barbs. Unfortunately, one did not survive the journey. Those glow light danios really enjoyed their new environment. For the new arrivals, it was probably their first time in flowing water, and they were quick to learn their natural skills of getting around rapids. Definitely this size school was much better than what I had previously. The hill stream loaches love browsing on that biofilm. In fact, they would even come out of the water to eat it off the glass. And I had heard many accounts online of hill stream loaches being found on the floor next morning. So this was a worry because both ends of the tank were rimless, so there was no protection. To stop my Borneo suckerfish, this is my solution. It's a quarter moulding, similar to what you might have in the shower of your house. So I got one that could take 6mm, and that would be the glass size, and it pushes down over the glass and gives a ledge, and I can actually slide that glass further into the ledge. So it's a good solution to stop the Borneo suckerfish from getting out. I could have just pushed the glass hard up against the edge, but because of that light fitting there would be a gap. I'd only need to forget to have it hard up against that light fitting on one occasion, because that would probably be the occasion that I'd lose a fish. So this one I just cut out a slot for the light to sit in, and all is well. They could still get out in this corner here. There are a few places where they could wiggle up, but I can't protect them from everything. Ideally, I would have liked a moulding similar to this. It would have been tidier to look at, a more elegant solution. But being in a small town, there's only a small selection of stuff I could use. So for now, I'm happy.
But where do you go to, my lovely, when you're alone in your bed? Won't you tell me the thoughts that surround you? I want to look inside your head. Yes, I do, yes, I do.
Where have all the young fish gone? Long time passing. Where have all my new fish gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young fish gone? Gone to hiding, everyone. When will they all return? When will they all return? Where have all the young fish gone? Long time all sing, where have all the young cats gone? Long time ago. Where have all my new fish gone? Gone to hiding, everyone. When will they all return? When will they all return?
And I know you go to my lovely when you're alone in your bed. And I know the thoughts that surround you because I can look inside your head.
It would appear that these fish have adopted a natural instinct, and that is to hang out in the riverbank and then dart out into the water stream when food goes past or if they want some exercise. Now the mountain minnows hang out in the Java fern, but all the glow lights go further in. I don't know where. They're under the filters for the pumps. I suspect they might even go into that polystyrene box through the ventilation holes. This might be one of the great mysteries of all time. I'm perfectly happy with this behaviour. After all, it is supposed to represent a river, and when you look at a river, you don't normally see anything until you watch for a while, and that's what it is here. If I want to draw the fish out, then I'll turn off one of the pumps, or turn it on, as the case might be, and they'll all come out to investigate. As for the hill stream loaches, well, the Borneo loach was the only type available to me, and I purchased 3, although I noticed that there are 2 colour variations. There are 2 of the Borneo loach coloration, which has spotted head and striped body. There is one with the yellow patination, and there appear to be a few names that describe this coloration. These 2 Borneo suckers appear to be the same sex, male, although without a female next to them it's hard to make a definite comparison, but I understand that the female does have a wider body. They've shown zero interest in feeding on plants or the biofilm on the branches, which raises the question of whether or not I have enough food in the tank to keep them going on a long-term basis. Certainly, as well as the rocks, there is the biofilm on the glass. At this stage, I'm not too worried about. I'd also like to get them used to eating algae wafers. My wife made me this little pottery feeding dish, which I've yet to hide within the rocks. It's interesting to note that they can clean all the diatoms off this size rock in one sitting. They're not so keen on little tufts of algae that grow, nor do they like the cyanobacteria. They're also fussy as to what size rock they like. The one on the left is probably about the smallest size that they settle on, They just don't bother with these other more pebble type ones, so in time I'll swap those out with larger rocks. And definitely they like big rocks to get under. That's where they appear to live, and it gives them a sense of safety. Also means that they also disappear. Bigger rocks, already on the shopping list. To provide an additional food source, I'm trying to get some biofilm to grow on these rocks. But unfortunately it's midwinter, so I don't think the sun's intense enough and the water's not warm enough. I'd be better off just putting this under a cheap light. Definitely an interesting fish, and I'd like to get a female or two at some stage in the future. My remaining panda kori has settled in well, although really needs a couple of friends. It is not as outgoing as the albino koris that I had in here originally, but mind you, it's still young. I'm not sure what other fish would suit this river. Pandagurus would be nice, but not available in New Zealand. My Cryptbalense is really taking off. Its leaves will extend halfway along the tank, and the jungle veil will go full length. The light green leaves of the dwarf sage show that it's now making a comeback. I originally pruned back the tatty leaves on the Java fern, and there's some nice lush growth now occurring. So the Elodia died off, but there was new growth, and if I keep the lighting up, then that should survive. Plus, it gave me a few visitors. Now check this out. Simaninopsis trifasciata, one of the largest freshwater snails endemic to New Zealand. The common pond snails don't seem to make much difference in my tank, other than leaving a perfectly round hole in a prize leaf. But these little critters, they're a real powerhouse and don't seem to damage the leaves at all. This one I'd place in the warmer waters of my nano tank, and it took to work cleaning all the algae and stuff off this branch. In fact, it seemed to take it right back to bare wood. I was most impressed, so I think I'll add a few more to this tank because it's one where algae and diatoms have been a bit of a problem. But I might need to limit the numbers in my river tank because they might compete with my Borneo suckers for food. I also found some of these small snails with shells coiled in a flat spiral. I believe they are Gyralis corina. So there we have it. This effectively brings to an end this journey. The river tank is built, although there's still some things I can do to enhance it. I hope you enjoyed finding parts of this interesting. But for me, the best part was the disappearing fish.